Hello, folks. Welcome to Retracing History here on Readout Productions. And normally we talk about historic locations and how entities can preserve history. Now, most often we think about historical preservation, we think about keeping something from hundreds of years, keep it in a static condition, and make sure the ages don't touch it. But what happens if there is a historically significant item that's been completely obliterated? Little trace of it exists. Well, you reconstruct it. Now, that could be a very costly endeavor, especially when you're trying to reproduce something that may not be wanted by people in the time you live in. Well, the team known as the T1 Trust are trying to bring back to life an extinct steam locomotive class. And this particular locomotive, the T1, claims to have been the fastest steam locomotive ever built. Let's take a peek at what the T1 Trust has so far succeeded and how you can help them fulfill their mission of bringing this locomotive back to life. We're going to backtrack here to the studio so I can tell you a bit of the story behind the T1 locomotive, and it's quite the story to tell. Well, let's go to the Great Depression. It's the 1930s in the United States of America, and like any other industry, the railroad is emerging battered and bruised from all the financial constraints. Now, another issue was the railroad was dealing with some new competitors, that being the airline and automotive industries. So, railroad companies like the Pennsylvania Railroad, which was the leading corporation in the United States of America at this time, they're looking for ways to draw in ridership, deprive the automobile and the airlines from losing these customers. Now, some railroad companies are going to be experimenting with diesel locomotives, but the Pennsylvania Railroad still thinks the future lies in steam power. They're looking to develop the next great class of steam locomotive, one that could replace their iconic K4 class, which has been old reliable on their 700-mile main line between Harrisburg and Chicago, but it's starting to show its age. They're needing to put on 2, 3, sometimes even 4 K4 locomotives just to haul one train. Enter the Baldwin Locomotive Works, the leading locomotive producer in the United States of America. And in particular, their chief engineer believes he's created the plan for the next great steam locomotive. It calls for a rigid frame with a wheel arrangement of 4-4-4-4. And what's really unique about it is it's going to have 4 cylinders to move those driving wheels. Now, for those that don't know much about steam locomotives, just a quick repack, and this may be too dumbed down for the rail enthusiasts, but hey, I'm going to try to keep things basic. Your traditional steam locomotive has 2 cylinders on it. Now, this was a very efficient, simple way of using steam power to power a locomotive. Problem was, it did some wear and tear on the driver wheels over time, requiring multiple times to tear a locomotive down and do a lot of small and large scale maintenance. Well, this design would kind of alleviate those additional maintenance hours, because instead of having 1 cylinder for each side of driver wheels, you're now going to have 4 cylinders. That's 2 cylinders on either side of this steam locomotive, which means you're only putting stress on 2 driver wheels at a time. It was also theorized that this would give you more pulling power and more speed. Well, the Baldwin Locomotive Works going to shop what they call this duplex design around, and eventually the Pennsylvania Railroad are the ones that are going to bite. But the Pennsylvania Railroad did have a caveat with this plan. They wanted Baldwin to modify the blueprints to include their poppet valve. The Pennsy had been experimenting with poppet valves on the K4 locomotives in the late 1930s and were very, very excited by the results they were seeing. Rail crews were reporting an increase in pulling power on these locomotives and also some increases in speed. So they wanted to use poppet valves in all future locomotive designs. Baldwin made the necessary adjustments, and the Pennsy was willing to invest. And in 1942, two prototypes of what was dubbed the T14444 steam locomotive made its premiere on the Pennsylvania line. Now, these two prototypes would run initially in the Altoona area, which was the central shop for the Pennsylvania Railroad, before it went much farther on the main line. And by all accounts, the rail crews and passengers were both enthusiastic. They were drawn in by this locomotive. Merely by aesthetics, the T1 had a dominating presence on the tracks. It had a distinct shark nose point on the leading end of the locomotive. Very aerodynamic, very Art Deco for this period of time. Iconic designs. T1's one of the best designs ever for a steam locomotive aesthetically. And the rail crews are talking about how efficient they're getting pulling power out of this locomotive. They're claiming they can clock speeds up to 100 miles per hour. In fact, there's one rail crew who were running somewhere in the Midwest on the Pennsy line. They claim to have clocked in at 143 miles per hour. Methinks they were running a little bit over the speed limit. The Pennsy was very satisfied with the trial runs of these two prototypes of the T1, and they ordered to mass produce them. In all, 50 T1s would be constructed in 1945 and 1946. Construction was divided between Altoona and Eddiestown, Pennsylvania, the latter being the location of the Baldwin Locomotive Works. However, when these mass-produced versions of the T1 took to the main line, they started to have complications. A lot of the rail crews began complaining of terrible wheel slippage on the T1. And essentially, with any steam locomotive, not just the T1, if you have a lack of traction on these driver wheels, they'll just start spinning uncontrollably, which can cause the whole locomotive to violently shake in some cases. This is why you have those sand domes in steam locomotives. You would pour sand down on the rails, and that was to give these locomotives more traction and to deter wheel slippage. So most wheel slips are pretty easy to get under control, but because we're dealing with a locomotive not with 2 cylinders, but with 4 cylinders, and dealing with this intricate poppet valve, it required a very delicate hand to operate the T1 at peak strength. And a lot of these crews just were not experienced with operating such a beast. They were used to the K4, which could take quite the beating on its cylinders. The T1 required a delicate touch, and not to discredit any of these rail crews, they were very experienced. They didn't necessarily have a delicate hand while messing with these. The problems added up with the wheel slippage, which started to damage the poppet valve and other parts of the T1s. And the T1's aesthetic design was not really adaptable for easy repair jobs, required extensive teardown to get into the interiors of the locomotive. And after just a few years, the old Pennsy decided this was not worth their effort. They decided to invest their efforts in diesel locomotives instead. They admitted that the diesel was the way of the future. The steam locomotive was a day of times past. And by 1953, all of the T1 locomotives that had been produced were laid up, and they would all be put to the cutting torch by the end of the decade. In most cases, this is where the story of this class of steam locomotive should end. There are many, many experimental steam locomotive classes around the period of the Second World War that American railroad companies vested large sums into, were really weird looking, and then they just didn't perform the way they wanted to, went to the diesel, cut up, lost the history. That's where most stories should end, but not with the T1. You can see with my hat, you know where this is going. You've seen the title to the video. A lot of questions circulated about the T1, and people began making the argument, as I've just put forward, that part of the issue of the T1 was lack of experience with the rail crews, that this was just too awkward of a locomotive for the Pensy's rail crews to handle, and that's what was causing a lot of the wheel slippage, that the right trained crew could operate this very smoothly. After all, the prototypes had no problem. What had changed between the prototypes and the mass-produced models? Also remember that these rail crews were flying like crazy down the main line, having a blast in the T1. and they had claimed to have clocked in mileage well over 100 miles per hour, in some cases clocking almost 140 miles per hour. Why is this important? Well, because the official speed record for a steam locomotive is held by an English locomotive known as the Mallard. It clocked in at 126 miles per hour. Hypothetically speaking, it appears the T1 locomotive outdid the Mallard on multiple occasions, but there's no way to prove that because, well, there's no surviving T1s to go test on a track. Well, in 2014, things are going to begin to change with the formation of a non-for-profit group known as the T1 Trust. It's multiple entities, numerous individuals, all with a common goal of wanting to build a brand new steam locomotive in the United States of America. It's a little bit difficult considering in the 21st century in this country, most of the facilities that allowed rail companies to mass produce these steam locomotives, such as the need of iron and steel and other metals, is overseas now. In any case, the T1 Trust is persevering, and ever since 2014 have been gathering funds, contracting outfits to start the creation of a brand new T1 locomotive. This is not for cosmetic display. This is not a scale model. This is a brand new T1 locomotive in production. Fast forward a decade later, and they're about 50% done with their goal. Let's go check out what the T1 Trust has thus far succeeded in reconstructing, building a new class of a extinct steam locomotive.
Well, here it is, and well, it's massive. It is a massive piece of metal. If we were looking at the locomotive completed, we'd be looking right at the front, and the T1 has a rather iconic conical front, kind of a nose piercing forward. The streamlined design was, interestingly enough, come up by the same man who came up with the iconic Coca-Cola glass bottle. And the idea was the streamlined design would be so stylish, people could not resist but to buy a ticket and travel behind the T1 on the Pennsylvania Railroad, thereby, in theory, depriving the airlines of passengers. The depression in the frame over here denotes where the firebox will eventually sit. During the presentation we just listed in on, we were informed that the T15550 is going to actually be oil burning. It's not going to be coal burning, and that just largely comes down to modern day regulations. But in any case, there will be the massive firebox right here, and that's why you have the dip in the frame. So we're actually looking at the rear of the locomotive looking forward.
The frame you see here is 65 feet 8 inches long. When completed, it'll be about 70,000 pounds on it, and it goes back to the shop in Ohio on Monday, in which they'll get much more of the steel put onto it, and I will have 10 guys welding on it, pretty much solid now, and to have completion sometime by the 4th of July on that. Then this will be completed, and at that point we'll start on the cylinders next, and manufacture the cylinders and mount the cylinders to the locomotive. We also brought along with us 4 of the 7 wheels we have. So we have 7 wheels totally cast. Here are 4 of them. We call this the Nakini family. We survive and operate via donations. Is how we're doing all this. This is 100% funded by rail fans and like-minded individuals. And Paul is one of those guys that has a love for railroading. He believes in what we're doing. He stepped up. Each driver costs $25,000 sponsorship to have his name on it. There's 4 of them here. On that, so he made a $100,000 donation to us to get these 4 drivers cast. The cost of the frame, we'll have about $300,000 in the frame when it's all said and done. If we'd have gone with a one-piece casting frame, it'd be about $3 million to have that done. We did locate a shop that would do it for us, but it was not feasible to do it when it came down to it. So we can save $2.7 million by going to this style. Guess what we're doing? Going with this. There's extra steel to be on the front and back. We did not put that on here because if we would have brought it on here, we would have had to mount the frame about 4 feet higher than it currently is. which is a nightmare for the trucking part of it, and strapping it down while you're going down the highway. Took us 5 hours to get here with the truck, so that would have been a little hairier situation to do it. So we did it this way so we can keep it lower to the trailer and keep it easy to move around. Each wheel weighs about 3,000 pounds on that, so there's 12,000 pounds of wheels there. What's interesting about it is it's got counterbalancing, so that you go take your car and go get new wheels put on it, and they put wheel weights on it and balance all the wheels. But we have to do the same thing with these big wheels. Inside these pockets, we'll get lead shot put in there, so little BBs basically in there. So as it goes around, that lead shot will move around to help balance out the cross balancing on the wheels to level it out. And then there'll be plates that will be put welded back over top of that to keep that shot inside there. And then every 4 or 5 years, you can pull the plates off and replace the lead inside there. It basically turns to dust, getting beaten around over the time. So, and then each wheel will get a tire put on it. So right now the wheels as they sit are 72 inches in diameter. They'll get a 4-inch tire, which will make them up to 80 inches when it's all said and done. So they're still not fully grown yet. They'll add to it, and it's going to be even bigger. We, as an organization, believe heavily in transparency. We want everybody to see what we're taking, your donations, when you buy a hat or make an online donation to us. We want you to see what we're doing with that money, and we're turning it into steel. I tell people that's my job here with the organization, is I take your money and I make sure the bank account stays as close to zero as possible, because I want to take that money and turn it into steel. So that is the exchange rate that we're doing, and we have 1 million pounds, the locomotive is 1 million pounds when it's all said and done. So we just continue to do that and turning into steel. And of course keep getting bigger and bigger, heavier and heavier. And I'm not sure after this if we're going to be able to bring these big parts back over here to Central PA. Most likely we'll have to have you guys come to Ohio where we'll be assembling it to actually start seeing it, just because the sheer cost of moving it is substantial on that. So we hope within the next 2 years to be able to take and put the frame on 4 completed driver wheels with axles on it and set the boiler on top of the frame. So if all goes well, the next 24 to 30 months we'll be in that position to do that. It all goes to speed of fundraising and the money coming in to make that happen. And again, working with the shops that we're working with, a lot of them have lead times of 24 to 36 weeks on that. So you're 6 months out to get shop time in. We have to utilize that shop time when we get it to get stuff in there and get it done and get it out. So what's always interesting is you never know who's going to show up at these events, or what they're going to bring with them, or what stories they're going to have. Yesterday a gentleman showed up, pickup truck, pulled in and says, "Hey, come here, you got to see what's in the back of my truck." And I've known the guy for a long time, and I'm like, he's a character, like, you never know what he's got. Sometimes it's very scary what he has in the back of his truck. Pulls up, he has a big beam in here. What in the world is that off of? Pennsy T1. He got that 50 years ago, pulled it out with a scrap line when they were scrapping T1s, and just kept it. He's had it in his barn for 50 years on that. He pulls out, donates to us. This is the largest surviving piece of a T1 outside the trucks, the tender trucks from a T1 that are over at the Altoona at the museum. It's underneath the Queen Mary flat car. Those trucks that are underneath the Queen Mary came off of Pennsy T1 or J1. Some of them came off J1, some of them off of T1. But so other than that, this is the largest piece of locomotive that is left. Pennsy is very efficient when it came to cutting up engines. They cut them all up. I mean, there's nothing saved on it, and it's unfortunate for us. Some people say, "Oh, you're rebuilding locomotive." No, we had nothing to even start with to even rebuild. So it is a new build locomotive, not a rebuild when it comes down to that. This cross is an extremely important piece of the entire design of it, the locomotive. And there'll be another one in the front. This is where the cylinders are going to be mounted. So we manufacture the cylinders for locomotive. Here's where I'm standing is where the cylinder bore will be, and there'll be the piston going back and forth right here, driving those 2 wheels, and another one up there driving the front 2 wheels. So what you have is that all this dynamic motion going back and forth here with the piston, that creates a lot of stress. You need to transfer a lot of that stress, of course, to the frame itself on that. So what happens is the steel comes through here, goes this side, the other side comes through, sticks out of here a little way, basically like a key way. So the cylinders will slide in over top of this on there, and then the forces get transferred from the cylinders to the frame through that. All the weld is there, as the weld is just kind of holding it in place and keeping it from falling off the locomotive. All the stress doesn't go transfer through the weld, it transfers right to the steel and the frame itself on that. So very critical part of it, because you have upwards of 1 million pounds of force going back and forth on here, especially the higher speeds. You need to transfer that to the frame as best you can. These are what's called the binders. Each one of these are critical, and they go underneath each of the wheel sets on here. And what that does is, again, keeps these in parallel with each other when you're going down. So if you take a wheel out and have to do work on the wheel or underneath the locomotive, the frame will tend to spread just because of the weight of the thing on it. So these keep that from spreading. It keeps it held back in place while it's in operation. As soon as you take this off, the frame will spread. And these have a tapered surface on the outside, which draws that back in and pulls the frame back square so it stays straight. So it's a critical and component. This one skid cost us $22,000 of just the machine parts of what you're looking on this one skid. So you kind of see the idea of how much stuff costs to make this thing happen. Like I said, well, $300,000 in this whole thing when it's all said and done, between all the machine work and all the fabrication. We'll have air compressors on the front of the engine that we talked about before, and then also the steam generators get mounted up there underneath the front prow, the cowling on the front of the locomotive as well too. So, the boiler is in St. Louis, Missouri, at a boiler shop called Continental Fabricators. Big boiler shop, one of the largest in the country on that. The cab is up in Chicago, Illinois, stored at the shop. The guys with the air compressors being restored to the same shop. The tender is in Buffalo, New York, on a siding up there, just sitting there waiting its turn to get restored on that. And then obviously the frame is here. And then we have skids, hundreds of other parts, pins, bushings, other little brackets and stuff like that on skids stored in a warehouse in Dover, Ohio.
Well, that's going to conclude this installment of Retracing History. If you want to see the T1 come back to life, put it back on the rails, and see if the T1 truly is the most fastest steam locomotive ever designed, be sure to head to the link in the description below to help support the T1 Trust Out in their mission. I, of course, fully am supporting you guys. Go support this mission. I would love to see this locomotive in action. Well, thank you guys for tuning in. Before you depart, be sure to hit the like button to let the YouTube algorithm know you do want to be educated by historical content on social media. And if you want to follow us, journey into various locations to talk about our shared past, be sure to subscribe here to Redoubt Productions. Thank you guys for watching. We'll see you next time.